Hey everybody, hey everybody. It's me, your host, Calvin Lowe, the Logan Power Show, nationwide, worldwide. As you can see, my guest is already excited. I'm excited as well. I know y'all are coming in to watch us. You're watching us across the nation, across the globe. So I want you to focus in. On today, we're bringing our first-time guest. He is running for solicitor for the Ninth Circuit here in South Carolina, the one and only Mr. Ben Pogue. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing fantastic, Calvin. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for talking about these important topics that, we haven't had a chance to have a real good public discussion on in such a long time.
Absolutely. And I know we had a big discussion to talk about, and our discussion is why you're running for, for solicitor. We know we currently, our current solicitor is Ms. Scarlett Wilson. She's been in office for over a decade strong. And we know that she has a lot of power, and you're coming into place and running against her. So the biggest question is, why have you decided to take on the challenge to run against the current person in charge?
Thanks, Calvin. If anybody who's been in the Charleston area for a long time, now I don't want to tell you how old I am, but it's been a long while. I've been in Charleston since 1995, so you might remember my first career was as a morning meteorologist over on Channel 2. So my first career was really about, doing things. You're a man of faith, and so am I, doing things my parents raised me to do, which is look out for folks who needed help. And so as a meteorologist, I was trying to do that by keeping people safe from storms. And I noticed throughout my career, especially toward the end of my career as a meteorologist, that folks who didn't have as much, they were most at risk for losing so much. We talk about being people of faith, Proverbs 31:8 and 9, you're talking about the rights of the destitute. And what really kicked me out of meteorology was seeing Hurricane Katrina and what happened down there. And so I was actually working not here in Charleston, but in Charlotte, North Carolina at the time. And I went to my news director and I said, I think I need to go volunteer. That's what I feel I'm called to do. And he said, well, I can't, can't hold on to your job. I said, maybe I can do live shots or something like that. He said, no. So I said, okay, well, I'm leaving. And I just called my wife up and I said, and my wife is Nina Sossman, now Nina Sossman Pogue. And she was an anchor back then too. And I said, look, I feel I'm called to go and serve down in the recovery effort with the Red Cross after Hurricane Katrina went down there. But after that experience, I ran a shelter for about 650 folks after Katrina. And I got back here, came back home, and I felt I really needed to advocate for people in a different way, advocate for people who had a lot on the line, who were being sued for much of my legal career. So I became a lawyer, graduated from law school in 2009, been a lawyer ever since. So 11 years as an attorney, and now I'm part of the South Carolina Bar House of Delegates. Been honored to name, one of Superlawyer's Rising Stars, those kinds of things. But when it comes down to how I want to use that law degree, when Nina and I and our friends talk about what we do for our community, Calvin, I'm a big Jackie Robinson fan, and Jackie said, life is not important except in that it impacts other lives. And so we thought, when Nina and I were talking about this is back in end of 2018, early 2019, we thought, how can we bring a positive impact to our community where we have the greatest impact for the people who need it most? And that's in this area of criminal justice, what we just like to call justice, because criminal justice is a term that puts a label on people, and it's a label that has been racially biased in the past. But when we look, and I've done a lot of advocacy work in education, in housing, environmental advocacy, one thing we consistently run into is people who don't have as much. They inevitably have a greater impact on their life when it comes to any way that they intersect with the criminal justice system, either as a victim or as an offender or as a neighbor or family member or friend of an offender or of a victim. If you don't have much, if you don't have many resources, then that impact pushes you down so much, and sometimes to a point where people get more and more desperate and they don't have an opportunity to lift themselves up and stay on a righteous path. So when we're looking at the landscape of things that really need to change, where we can have an impact, the solicitor's office is where we've got the biggest disparities and unfairness, where we can have the greatest impact by having somebody who's a leader in that realm, who really looks out for everybody and provides real justice for everyone. And it's a spot where we haven't had a real change in leadership and changing that mindset, and I'll talk about that in a second, for 20 years. It's been 20 years since a Democrat, and I'm a Democrat, has run for solicitor in the Ninth Circuit. 20 years. And one of the reasons is that a lot of attorneys who are former solicitors, or maybe they're criminal defense attorneys, it's really difficult for them to run for this position because the current solicitor has so much power and so much discretion that if somebody is a criminal defense attorney, for instance, and runs against her, she can tank that person's clients all day long. She can make sure that there are extra charges, whether they're fair or not. She can make sure that the process of them getting to trial or getting a plea deal takes longer and longer and longer, and that can mean more time in jail, even for someone who is not guilty, even for someone who's completely innocent. So there just aren't people who are ready to run for this spot. We need somebody who's going to engage in the fight, who's based in the community, who has been working with the community in advocacy in a lot of different realms, and who's willing to go on up and take some punches and willing to really stick their neck out and make the changes that need to be made, talk about things that need to change, which number one of those things is racial equity, and go on out and, you know, put your career on the line. And that's what we can afford to do. That's what we're going to do. That's where the biggest change needs to be made. So there was really no question after we made that kind of decision. This is the way we can have the greatest impact. This is what we're going to do.
Absolutely. Now I'm a Jackie Robinson fan myself. I'm a Dodgers fan also. Played low college baseball, so I know about adversity and playing for certain sports where you're the minority and not the majority. I played some soccer throughout my time, and I can tell people when you're maybe the only kid on the team that looks just like you, and everyone else looks different. But on a global scale, you are the majority. And also, you know, play basketball as well. So being a trailblazer, going against a heavy hitter, what are some things you're going to try to expose? And what I mean by expose, I think a lot of times what we don't, and I want to be, you know, quite frankly blunt with a lot of people who are watching this, is that there is people who get locked up. I want to be straightforward with you. It's not just African Americans and Latinos that's getting locked up. What we're not seeing is when the trial is over, you know, guilty, not guilty, given a second chance, not given a second chance. That is when the disparity sort of just is like an overlay. It's like a seesaw. Like you literally see African Americans and Latinos are sitting down, and the Caucasian is way up there when he talks about like who's been given a second chance. So if you were given the opportunity, people wanted to vote for you, what are some things you want to see get changed which is in our current Ninth Circuit issues that we currently are facing right now?
Thank you for asking that, Calvin. So let me answer in a couple different ways. First, to directly answer your question, and then give a little bit of background if you don't mind. So our racial equity platform, and that is the priority in our campaign. And we're literally the only campaign for solicitors or district solicitors, just like district attorney everywhere else. It's the person who's in charge of what most people think of as prosecuting serious crime. But what the district attorney or solicitor in our case is tasked with is doing justice. Do justice, right? So when we think of how do we do justice, and the first question we ask is what's the thing we need to fix most? It's racial inequity in the system. So our racial equity platform is really 4 quick things. First of all, hire African-American attorneys. Just right off the bat. You can't have trust in a justice system that doesn't reflect the community. It just doesn't happen right now. So we've got 40 attorneys, 40 deputy solicitors in the solicitor's office. And the Ninth Circuit is all of Charleston County and all of Berkeley County. So if you're in Charleston or Berkeley County on your ballot on November 3rd, and hopefully you vote early, because we know that there's a lot of voting shenanigans that are being going on out there. But vote early, and you can do early at-home voting. But we need African-American attorneys in that office. We've got 40 deputy solicitors now. 1 is African-American. So that does not lend itself, especially for the position that is supposed to do justice for the entire community. It doesn't lend itself to making sure that the head person in charge, the solicitor, is getting input from all kinds of life experiences that really reflect our community. 1 out of 40 is 2.5%. Now, about 25% of the Ninth Circuit is there. So that just doesn't reflect our community. So that's number 1, hire African-American attorneys. And I don't want to hear any of this stuff about these old racially biased tropes about there weren't qualified candidates or not enough people applied. So hire African-American attorneys. Number 2, make sure that our juries are diverse. Have African-American jurors. And right now, our current solicitor, according to a 2016 study that was mentioned in the Post and Courier, strikes African-American jurors 7 times more often than white jurors. So that means if you're African-American and you're in the jury pool waiting to see if you're selected for a trial, if you're African-American, you're 7 times more likely to be excluded from that trial, which we know from our solicitor's office is more likely to have a defendant who's Black. Well, our data, scientific studies show us that if a Black defendant is facing an all-white or nearly all-white, maybe with 1 African-American jury, then they're much more likely to be convicted even if they are innocent. We see this work from the Innocence Project, where they work on exonerations for like DNA evidence and things like that for people who are on death row. And they find African-Americans who faced all white juries are much more likely to be wrongfully convicted. So it's a huge part of making sure that the justice system is one we can trust. Have African-American juries. We can change that like that, just by a change in who is leading that office. We also need a couple of other steps. One is for the deputy solicitors to be in the community, not in the community making speeches, not at a podium talking down to people and saying, here's what I'm doing right, but being in the community meetings, real community meetings, and listening to what's going on, listening to what regular folks think of their community. And I already do this in my work with North Charleston Police Department's recap program. When we walk down the street, and often I'm the only white guy with a lot of my friends who are police officers, leaders of the faith community, who talk to regular folks and say, what's going on? Tell me what's happening. So in my plan, every single one of those 40 deputy solicitors is going to be at a community meeting once a quarter. So 4 times a year. That is 4 times a year for 40 solicitors. That's 160 community meetings a year. We need that kind of dialogue to have people present and say, what's going on? We're going to listen. And finally, we need a racial bias audit of the solicitor's office. City of Charleston Police Department has done it. Now North Charleston Police Department has done it. It's hilarious and ludicrous that our current solicitor talks about real leadership when all she does is follow. So we hope that we follow these police departments in having a racial bias audit. And Calvin, 2 of the first questions that any real racial bias audit is going to ask is, how many African-American attorneys do you have and how often do you strike Black jurors? Well, those are big questions. Those are 2 losses. So we need to have a real racial bias audit, not that's done by a friend of the solicitors out of town, but that actually is done by an organization that's done racial bias audits before and that integrates the community. So backing up to why some of these things are so important, especially for me as somebody running for a solicitor. I'm white Right?
Yeah.
Right. I'm white. So one of the things that we really need to be part of the discussion is for people who look like me to say, I have lived a life and I have a life experience of white privilege.
Hmm.
And it's got to be part of the discussion, not just once or twice, not just implicit bias training once a year, but an ongoing and continual part of the discussion where people who look like me have got to say, I don't know enough. I need to learn. I need to learn where my racial bias blind spots are, where I have had racial bias in the past, and how I go out of my way, not to be non-racist, but as Ibram Kendi said in his book, how to be anti-racist. Because we don't just need somebody saying, I'm not racist. That's really one of the hallmarks of white fragility, is to somebody say, hey, don't call me a racist. I'm not, and then they're afraid that they might get hurt by that emotionally. And trying to compare that to real actual oppression that people have had for years, people of color. We need somebody to step up and say, I need to learn. So it was interesting after I was at the protest for the Calhoun Monument coming down. And I talked to a guy who's a friend of mine who's the historian at Emanuel AME, Mother Emanuel. And he said, Ben, there's a lot of talk and people are excited. How do we make sure that this is real? And I said, Lee, I think the only way we make sure that that happens is when people like me make sure that we engage in the discussion and say, I want to be held accountable and I need to make it part of our public discussion that I need to learn more and be aware of my racial bias, my white privilege, and address some of those issues so that we can start making sure that they don't happen over again. That's why it's so important to have so many African-American attorneys that they can express their opinion and be decision makers and be heard. That's why it's important to have African-American jurors, not just one or two, but diversity on every jury that reflects our community so that there's enough people that they feel they can be heard and vocalize what their thoughts are, give voice to those people. That's why we need to listen in these community meetings. That's why we need an unbiased, real racial bias audit. So it's a lot that goes into it. It's got to start with somebody who makes racial equity in our justice system a priority and who gets the word out there, whether you're talking to Democrats or Republicans or anyone, that we cannot have a justice system that we all trust, that works for everyone, unless we get rid of the inequity in the system that breeds mistrust to begin with.
Amen. Now, one thing, if given the opportunity, one idea is called an audit on convictions that have been given. And what I mean by that, there are situations to where me and you, say we're together, let's say, for instance, and it happens a lot. If I got into an altercation and I defended myself, you got in an altercation, you defended yourself. We both got locked up. I go with a public defender. You have a top lawyer. 9 times out of 10, I'm gonna be in
I'm getting a
jail.
better deal.
I'm gonna get in jail more time because I don't have legal representation that's facing me. The second thing is that you see a lot. This is solicitors will go for what's called the conviction rate, the percentage rate, where they won't give someone's called pretrial intervention. They won't give that person an opportunity, or they'll do like, if it's something really petty, they be like, man, drop this case, call it a day, move on, have a great day. Sometimes if you don't have the right lawyer that's gonna bump heads with that solicitor in a good way, like say, hey, that's my good friend, hey, this is my buddy, let's cut the case, so on and so forth. So the biggest question I have is that, you can have people that look like us, but the conversation of what happens when the judge gives his verdict, the jury can do that, because you can put stuff in place. That doesn't mean everybody's going to abide to it. So how are we going to stop some of these pocket holes that we got going on? Because there are some judges that are, if you catch them on the right day, will give a person, the opportunity of a second chance. There are some judges, if you catch them on the wrong day, they'll take you off and they'll go from there. Or the solicitor, you'll see it sometimes will be like, well, for this case, I'll give you 10 days, or this one I'll give you 3 months, not knowing if you have no job for 3 months, you have no way to supply your family. So you just put that person from employed to unemployed, won't get any type of unemployment benefits. You just lost your job. You just have lost your health care. Your house may be lost, or apartment, or whatever it is. If you go, if you say I'm taking a deal because I'm taking a deal without no understanding what I'm signing, then you just push up under probation. If you're under probation, if the current job you have may give you some leeway, but say if you want to move on to another job, you have to put yourself as a criminal. And by putting yourself as a criminal, 9 times out of 10, most jobs are not going to hire you. So what would be some things if you were getting the opportunity, would you do like an audit and say, hey, I'm gonna go back to couple, like it's like a year or two. It's the past 2 years to see like who we put away, was it justified? Maybe we need to rethink this and go back and do something, giving some, reconciliation. Like, we're not saying we're gonna pay you. We're saying, like, this person's been in too long. This case has been on the docket way too long. Because I've seen cases where the person's still in Howell Cannon and they've been in there for a year waiting for
Forever.
trial. That kind of stuff.
2 years. More
2
than
years.
2 years. It's without being convicted. That's crazy. That's crazy. So there are definitely things we can do about it. In fact, there are things we should have been doing a long ago. So one of the things, and Kim Fox up in Cali, who are district attorneys, solicitors, prosecutors around the country, who are frankly more progressive, they're all Democrats, are doing some of this stuff. Conviction integrity units. So that means making sure that we're using the right processes, making sure that we're using racially equitable processes, and making sure that we are reviewing those cases that came up. And one of the reasons we got this big article in the Post and Courier that talked about how our current solicitor tries cases almost exclusively against Black defendants, eliminates jurors of color far too often, and hasn't had a racial bias audit, all these kinds of things come up, only has one Black attorney out of 40 on her staff. That's because that all came from a post-conviction relief hearing. Well, we should have conviction integrity units all along the way to make sure that we're continually doing the right things. So there are a couple layers of this, like you mentioned, in all these kinds of things. One has to do with the way we do campaigning. One has to do with making sure that it's not just a single audit or a single implicit bias training, but that it's a continual process. So let me talk about those two things. First of all, especially since you were talking about the disparities in what happens to one person who's arrested and charged with a crime versus another person who's African-American like you, person who's white like me. It should not matter who you are or how much money you have or who you're connected to in terms of whether or not you get justice. But repeatedly, we do see that people who are poor or indigent or just working class families can't afford a personal attorney. So if you can't afford a personal attorney, you probably don't have an attorney for you at your bond hearing, which means your bail bond could be set way high. Probably can't afford that. Guess where you're going to end up? In jail. But if you have a private attorney, and if you can select an attorney who has made campaign contributions to the solicitor, because right now it's not against the rules to solicit campaign donations from criminal defense attorneys that you do plea deals with. Whether or not that has any effect, and I'm going to tell you right now, I believe that our current solicitor tries not to be influenced by these things. But psychology, science tells us that when you have these kinds of incentives in place, it's hard not to be influenced by them. So that's one of the reasons that once I'm elected, I'm not going to get any donations. I'm going to refuse donations from criminal defense attorneys because it's not right. Because I don't want plea deals to have me thinking, did this attorney give to my campaign? No, it's not fair if that's a part of the conversation. So we've got to rethink the way that we do our elections, the way that we understand who can contribute to campaigns and who should not, at the very least, be contributing to campaigns. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is this notion of how do we continually make sure that there is racial equity, that there's socioeconomic equity, that there's cultural equity, and even that there's gender equity too. Well, our answer to that is something that other places around the country are starting to do that should have been done a long time ago here in Charleston, especially after the Emanuel Nine, especially after Walter Scott. We have created already a community action team that's not just a part of our campaign to make sure that we have guidance largely from the African-American community on what we should be doing, on making sure that our policies and the things that even my language and finding my blind spots have a group of individuals to say, Ben, make sure you're thinking about this, make sure you're considering that. We want our community action team to be a permanent part of the solicitor's office. So our community action team, and you can find out more about it on our website, votebenpogue.com. There's a part that says community. It's 12 individuals who are connected, who are mostly, like I said, African-American, but also connected to other parts of our community, like our transportation advocacy community, housing advocacy, healthcare advocacy, education advocacy, our Hispanic Latinx community. I mean, you name it. We've got somebody who's connected to our legislative community, Crystal Matthews. You probably know her. She does great work for our community. But to have that be a permanent part of the solicitor's office means that every 2 weeks, there's a meeting with 12 individuals to say, what have you done this week as far as making sure all of your staff is having a diverse jury for every trial? What have you done over these past 2 weeks to make sure that there's no bias in terms of what the charges are for any individual? To make sure that you're offering PTI for people? To make sure that, here's an interesting thing, Calvin. You mentioned, okay, what if we get charged with the same crime, same process, then afterward, one person's life gets sucked down the drain, the other person's life gets elevated. What are we making sure that we're really practicing not just equality, but equity, making sure that everybody has an equal opportunity for success, not just treated equally. Because it seems, and we had an article in the Post and Courier recently, this kid who was charged with multiple felonies, and while he had these felony charges pending, he's out there going to college, he gets a job. I don't know how easy it is for most people to get a job where you have pending felony charges, probably not that easy, but this kid managed to do it. And then the ending charge is 5 years probation, right? Does that happen for everybody? I mean, even if that's the right thing we should do, and I'm a fan of only using incarceration when we really need to, because it's so devastating for families. Mm-hmm. But is that an opportunity everybody gets? Is it equitable? Now, it might be equal to say everybody has the opportunity to hire a high-priced lawyer, to go to college and get somebody to fix them up with a job while they have criminal charges pending. But it's not really equitable. It doesn't give everybody a fair chance of success. So our community action team has got to not just guide policy, not just connect our justice system with other areas where we need social justice work, but act as a continual accountability measure on racial equity, socioeconomic equity, gender and cultural equity. You got to have a team there that is always watching you, sure that we build the trust and do the right thing once in a while.
Got it. Amen. Now, one thing final thing I know, because you know your time is valuable, we just appreciate you at the Logan Power Show.
You know I can talk all day too.
No, we just appreciate you. We want people to get the meat of the conversation. Final thought is that the perception, the reality, the opportunities, if given the opportunity becoming the Ninth Circuit solicitor, would you consider changing the guard of giving young people that are in high school and college internship opportunities? And what I mean by that is like saying, a lot of times people can say like, man, Calvin, I got this beat team, that beat team. The teams are there, but for a young person not really seeing the power of saying, well, why in the world you want to go become a solicitor? Why you want to become a lawyer? Like, what's the benefits? But they don't see the whole big picture. Sometimes you see this one particular pocket of the big whole, or you see one piece of the cake, but not the whole cake. If you see the whole cake, it's like, oh man, there's some other flavors I didn't see is on that side. Maybe if I knew this was on this side, maybe I'd have chose this cake instead of just focusing on this one based off that one piece. But if I saw the whole entire big picture, then I can say, okay, when I grow up, maybe I want to go and behind succession, because what I've seen just in this area, like people, I like people South Carolina, my personal experience, it seems like we have the old crab in the barrel mentality. Like, hey, I'm here, and there's no way I'm gonna let you get to where I'm at, because if I even let you even see the promised land, it's never gonna happen. Or I'm not gonna allow this particular area to grow, because if you grow, then my my uh my percentage rate of locking people up is not as high like it used to be, because I've changed your mindset and thinking like, hey, if you work harder in life, if you change the mindset, then maybe, hey, you can do better. Because just let people know how crazy things are. The city of Charleston, if you just go a couple streets over, there is the projects right there in the smack dab of Charleston. If you go downtown where our beloved courthouse is, there are people who's homeless if you shift a little bit over and go to one spot to another spot. But understand this, the guard is totally changed, because if you go down further on Meeting Street, you'll say, okay, well, there's still projects over there. There's still the east side. You know, you still say, well, that's a bad neighborhood. Well, a lot of great kids that came out from the neighborhood is that you got to be able to give the other kids another opportunity. Say like, hey, let's not talk about we're going to go this. Let's go to the courthouse, not just saying we're going to courthouse saying who's doing this, but let's see an opportunity. Maybe you want to be a lawyer growing up. Maybe you want to help your neighborhood. Maybe not just saying, I want to be a solicitor. Maybe it's somebody, well, hey, I just want to help the community out. And maybe I've seen some wrong people get locked up. And sometimes people tell the truth and the stories. So that's the question I want to ask. If given that opportunity, would you consider some of the high school or the college kids given the option to volunteer and help just to see things, not saying like, you know, you get paid for it, just the experience, to say like, hey, I got an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely, Calvin. You know, when when we talk about, it's interesting. You know, there are a lot of layers to all the things that we talk about. In our community action team, you know, there are people who are phenomenally intelligent, who are really plugged into a lot of different life experiences and pathways in life. They're really actually connected to the community, not the people who just stand up and say that they represent the community, but they're actually doing the work. So when I go out there and I'm shoveling mulch and things like that in Chicora, Cherokee, making sure that the playground is safe. Now, AJ Davis is out there with me. You know, he's got a shovel in hand too. And he's the one who says, Ben, you got to get on out here and grab a shovel. But when you talk to folks, and when somebody like me is guided by really great people, one of the things we talk about is, sure, here's our policy initiatives, but here's a whole bunch that goes into that. So when we talk about the importance of African-American attorneys, what does that really mean? How do you do that? Well, it means you got to start recruiting from HBCUs to make sure that you get African-Americans going to law school. And you've got to make sure that you're in the law schools helping to cultivate the opportunities of those individuals. And if you really want that to happen, well, you got to make sure that you're in high schools. And if you really want to reduce crime and work on social justice, like we talk about with our community action team, social justice issues include mentoring and education. So how do we do, well, we've got this 4-word mantra for our community action team: reduce crime, increase justice. That's it. That's what we're trying to do: reduce crime, increase justice. So if we want African-American attorneys, we want people to have good education, we want to do social justice work with, well, then we need to be in those schools. We need to be making sure we have high school interns coming on in. We need to have, and this is Representative Crystal Matthews' idea when we were talking the other day. I'm a big fan of Crystal's, and she's one of my really good friends. And Sam Bellamy is also an all-star. I don't know if you know Sam, just an all-star in the mentoring community throughout the state. And they were talking about this, making sure that in elementary and in middle school, we're bringing kids in to see courtrooms to make sure that they feel this is a place where they belong as a juror or as an attorney or even as a judge, to see that pathway of success and make sure that we are there helping to support their education, advocating for funding for public education, advocating for really teaching parents how to be better parents and to deal with sometimes kids who they feel are going off the rails, which is a big part of our mentoring community, what we do. We got to be in all these areas if we really want to make a difference. So even though we talk about our specific policy initiatives and they're boom, 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 point by point by point, there's a whole lot more that goes into them. And the community action team, that's why, Calvin, that's so important to have people who guide the policy, but also this other aspect of it where we are networking justice with community solutions for transportation, for education, for our mentoring community, healthcare, et cetera. Because specifically, let me talk about the mentoring community. And like you mentioned, having kids come on in and be interns, having them take tours of the courtroom, having them sometimes, yes, take tours of jail and say, this is what potential ramifications of bad behavior get you. And that can be really scary, but part of the learning process. All that's so important. The mentoring community, though, is, I think, the biggest cog of this all, because our mentors around the area, whether you're in a big nonprofit or whether you're in a small nonprofit, or whether you just know some kids around the neighborhood, our mentors have a better gauge of what kids and parents really need help and what people are maybe at risk of offending, of doing some behavior, getting frustrated in life, having those really difficult times. We know that, for instance, North Charleston High School, just down the road from where I live, one of the highest student homelessness populations in the state of South Carolina. The mentoring community has its ear to the ground on all that. That's why they need to be connected and working hand in hand with our justice system to prevent crime, identify individuals who need help, and identify individuals who could be rising stars, who could be the next solicitor, who could be the next sheriff, who could be the next Reggie Burgess out there, who could be the next mayor of North Charleston, Hanahan, Goose Creek, downtown Charleston, St. Stephen, Cainhoy, Hugie, you name it. But we've got to do the work on the front end. Incarcerating people on the back end, that's what the traditional role has been, but it costs a lot of money, it's not effective, and it doesn't reduce crime. We can do a better job for less money, less taxpayer money, at preventing crime if we do this kind of outreach. But Calvin, that's also one of the reasons that it's inexcusable that this kind of approach has not happened before. I gave an interview to a national magazine that really focuses on criminal justice reform called The Appeal. And the web address is theappeal.org, theappeal.org. And one of the things that I was saying to them in the interview is that the overall goal of the prosecutor should be to prosecute less crime, to make sure that there's less need for that office to be so expansive, to be so powerful, to do so much, because ultimately we want to reduce crime and increase justice.
Amen. Amen. That's what we want to do. So for those that are listening, Mr. Ben Pogue, nominee for the 9th Circuit of South Carolina. I'm going to tell you again, I know who I'm going to vote for. You have two incumbents you have two people that are running. You have Ms. Scarlett Wilson, you have Mr. Ben Pogue who's running right now. Ms. Scarlett Wilson's been in office again for a long period of time. And we have a person right now who is here in the Logan Power Show. And we pray that, if he's given the opportunity to win, that, we get that connection. Because I don't know about y'all, but change is needed. When people say all the time when South Carolina, like, that's the old South, nothing's going to change. Well, hey, there's a lot of things can change if people want change. If you're happy with what you have, then stick what you want. If you're not happy, hey, let's call for change. Let's get to the polls. Let's early voting, mail in your vote, go to the voters registrations office. Hey, definitely get connected. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, all I want you to do is make the right choice. Hey, go and visit his website. Hey, email him, see, may get some feedback, that what you want to do. I know about this. The Bible says in all that getting, you better get some understanding. And my thing is that when it comes to voting, you better know who you're voting for, because sometimes you can say, okay, that person sounds good, but it's all about their character and how they come across. Mr. Ben Pogue, you can definitely find a lot of his information. He's been a lot of people who I've known show. So something you want to keep in contact with, someone you want to give an opportunity to. Look his name up. He's been on plenty of shows. People who I've known, Mr. Rajon Lewis, so on and so forth, and plenty of other shows that have spoken many occasions. So I want you all just to give this person an opportunity to say, hey, speak into your home and speak for yourself. Well, I want to thank you again, Mr. Polk, for this blessing us. Everyone who's been watching us again, please make a decision in November who you're going to vote for here in this area. Hey, that's all the time I got. My name is Calvin and Logan, Power Show nationwide, worldwide. We love you. We'll see you soon.